back. I promise you. This is more fun than being caregiver. It truly is. And I'm happy to be here. Ken said to me as I left, he said, tell everybody I miss them and I want to come back.
Aww.
And I said, well, you're gonna. We're working on it, it's getting there. That back was a little throwback for us, and but he's dealing with it, and we're just praying that they were right. 2 to 3 weeks or 6 weeks, whatever it is.
4 to 6, you told me.
4 to 6, okay. I'm just, if I start spouting strange stuff, get the hook.
We'll excuse you.
Yeah, please do. It really is good to be back, and I want you to know I learned so much about judging from our lesson today. It's called Before You Judge, and or being judged or judging other people. And I just want you to know before we start, I will not judge your looks, your hairdo, your southern accent, your outfit, your remarks, or your lack of knowledge about being judged or being the judge, because I'm right there with you. And I just wanted to I might have to make a few small judgments, but basically I'm not judging. I was trying to think of an example of when I was judgmental, but I really couldn't think of an example that I wanted to tell on myself. I didn't want to admit I was judgmental. And then I read the first 2 verses of this lesson. And the first 2 verses say, this is Matthew 7, 1 and 2, do not judge so that you will not be judged. For in the very way you judge, you will be judged. And by your standard of measure, you will be measured. It will be measured to you. And I thought, oh my goodness. Jesus is letting us know that those who judge will themselves be judged with a judgment of equal measure. And more than likely, if you're like me, you might make a judgment and you don't really think about it, unless it's something really serious that I've given a little thought to. But many times, some of that stuff just comes right off our head, you know how we do. So anyway, I started thinking about it, and when I was younger, much younger, I would never go to the grocery store without a halfway decent outfit on and makeup. I mean, I just thought, that's the minimum. Now, of course, I was working at the time, so that wasn't really that hard. And I would get there and I'd look around and think, oh my gosh, they just came in from the garden. Or what on earth were they thinking about? Showing up looking like that. But, I didn't know them. But I was judging. And I have seen even worse. I'll tell you about that later. But if you fast forward about 40 years, things have changed. And I might be working in the yard, but I'm telling you, if I gotta go to Kroger, I am not coming inside, changing clothes, fixing my hair, and putting on makeup. I just pray that I don't see anybody I know. And it doesn't work. The Lord is leaving me. I always see somebody I know, so that doesn't work. But I am not changing clothes to run to Kroger. So there you go. Or someday I've been helping Ken all day, and I don't put on makeup, and I'm wearing, whatever I just wear around the house. I don't have time to look for just the right outfit. I am not putting on makeup, and forget about the hair. I do think all women my age wear ponytails, don't they? I think that's what it is. That's what I've got by the time I do that. Well, forget about that. So I have changed. I have changed my attitude. And I thought about it, and I thought, now, I am the one that some young, attractive girl is going, oh, God, just get out of the lane. She came over here looking like this, and that hair, oh my goodness. And I think, just wait, honey, just wait, it's gonna happen to you, and you don't need to judge me. I am now one of those women who are being judged, and I just don't even worry about it. There were reasons, and I'm sure the one I was kind of going, there were reasons that they came that way. Maybe they did just come out of the garden and said, I'm not changing to go over there and get a loaf of bread. It's just not going to happen. And I was just a little too self-righteous, which is something we find out we're not supposed to do in this lesson. And I should have been thinking about reasons. And today I'm a little more cautious about that stuff. And I think as we age, we learn, and we are more cautious, and we think, well, that's just sad. That's just,
Bless their heart.
Bless their heart, yeah. I told you, my friend Hillary from Detroit just laughs every time I say that, and it pops out. I don't know if I'm going to say that, it just pops out. But yeah, I do bless their heart. The only thing I pray about is that something will not happen that is so bad that I jump out of bed, throw on robe and slippers, and I run to Kroger in the middle of the night. I mean to tell you, I was there after dark and saw something I just couldn't believe. And the checker said to me, you should stay all night if you want to see something. She said, you think they just jumped out of bed and ran over here? They wanted a, cookie, or they wanted something, I don't know. I'm praying nothing happens to me so bad that I feel that I must do that. Something good. I mean, there may have been an emergency. They were at least dressed. They at least had on clothes. But remember what Matthew said in verse 1 and 2. Do not judge so that you will not be judged. Yeah. Or in the way you judge, you will be judged. And by your standard of measure, it will be measured to you. Well, my standard was, dressing up for the grocery store, and I let my standards down. That's all I can say. We get to the next two verses, or next 3 verses, and it describes an example of an outrageous attitude. Now let me read these verses, and this is something, I told Ken, I said, this is like preaching to the choir. They know all this stuff, and they've read all this stuff, but you get a little refresher course here, I guess. Why do you look at the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, and behold, the log is in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. Well, our lesson points out that there are 3 words here we need to think about. And one is speck. And when the Greek used the word speck, the Greek word, it could be something you could see, but it could be even so small you couldn't see. Sometimes we look at our eye and think, oh, I've got something in my eye, and you cannot really see it. Maybe a little eye drops will help wash it out, but it can be that small. And then Jesus chose the log as the opposite side. He wasn't making any bones about this description. Little bitty or huge. So the log in the eye is the next thing that you were looking for. It's huge, and it stands out, and people see it. And you've got to get rid of that before you even begin to think that you have the right to express some problem with somebody else. The hypocrite will overlook the plank in their own eye, yet complain about the speck in another's. In this example, the brother that they talk about is one who has the same belief system and the same nature. He is the Christian brother that you are talking to. And all through this, you get an overview. When Jesus started out, he was going to talk to the disciples and teach them, but of course the crowd came around, and you get the feeling and you get the understanding that all of this was the nature and the disposition that Christians should have, and this should be what was in the church, and to act in this manner would set the church apart. People would understand and look at that, and everybody would understand how they should be behaving. There seemed to be little morality back then, and people weren't too terribly worried about doing good, and mostly they were just killing people and running around grabbing land or grabbing wives, whatever they. But there wasn't a lot of concern about what I do. And really, if you think about it, the way they made a living was capturing other people and taking their stuff. So that's what they were doing. And this is a whole new concept. This whole idea of this morality is a whole new concept. We really have to start with our own problems, our own shortcomings, before we think we can help somebody in the church. If somebody came to me with a major theological problem, I think I'd just have to faint. I don't know, and there's no reason for me to start trying to tell them anything. I said, you probably need to see the minister on that and get the real idea of what should be. So you need to be careful, get rid of your shortcomings. Once that's done, you can really give some aid to people who are receptive to what you have to say. And that's another part that we need to think about. These people are receptive. And receptive to me seemed to be the key word. I think back, now my examples are kind of silly because I don't have any real big deal things that I can remember or tell. But I think back to when we were planning my cousin's wedding. And she and her sister have the curliest hair I have ever seen. I mean, the curliest. Well, Janelle, all through high school and college, spent a fortune straightening that hair and keeping it blonde. And it always looked lovely. Well, somewhere along the way, I don't know what happened. We let go of the blonde, we let go of the straightener, and that hair looked like a bush. It was long. I mean, it looked like a bush. Now, see here, I'm judging. But I had long straight hair. She could tell me, do something with that too. But I mean, this stuff looked like a bush. And here's comes her wedding. Her wedding's come up. Now, she was the same age as my sister. They were very close. And my sister said to her, she had this really cute friend who had hair like Janelle. And she said, she found a hairdresser who was really able to cut that curly hair and really make it look great. Hint, hint. She either wasn't receptive or she was dumber than I thought. And she did not pay attention to that. She didn't care about that. And I guess she thought maybe the veil would cover that bush. And she didn't worry about it. She was not receptive. It just went over her head. I said, well, I was appalled that my sister even said anything. I guess I was a little more conservative back then, but she said, I just thought, she'd go, oh, where is this person? I'll get her until I'll look, get the, no. So, receptive. Somebody has to want to hear what you have to say. You can't corral them in the parking lot and say, look, let me tell you something. Something I need to tell you about your appearance, or something I need to tell you about the way you're acting, or something. They're just not going to want to hear that. So you need to be sure of what you're doing. Well, if you move away from my little glib example about cousin Janelle, I've got another story about her too, but that one she did pay attention to. How about that? She did pay attention. You need to really understand the position of your church. And this is where you and I need to know what our church thinks, what we believe, what we stand for, so that if somebody is asking about it and genuinely wants to know, we can tell them, or we can at least send them to a place where they can get good information. My friend Hillary, who I mention a lot, is Jewish. So I had to tell her we didn't handle snakes. She knew that. But she does have, she kind of groups all Protestant churches together, and she was kind of surprised when some of the churches voted to come out of their group. And then they had to pay for those churches and everything. And I said, well, Hillary, let me explain to you what the sovereignty of the church is, or our ability to do pretty much what we please. Now, they could kick us out of our association, but we might not care, and we might not worry about it too much. And we own our building, and whatever money we give to our church stays at our church. So there's a real difference there, and that's why some churches maybe are really, really strict. I heard through the grapevine that they found a candidate who might have worked for the church, But his first demand was that all women were removed from the staff. And they went, woo. I don't know who talked to him, but he's not on the list anymore, so
Yeah.
suffice that to say, that did not go over well. And so I said, you might have churches like ours that, have women deacons and don't roll over and die if a woman stands up and preaches from the pulpit. And others would say, no way could that happen. We're not gonna let that happen. So we have a lot of autonomy. And and she was interested, she wanted to know. And anytime I had a question about the Jewish faith, she has a cousin who is a rabbi, she just calls him up and if she doesn't know, and she's pretty knowledgeable. But if no one wants to know about your church, that would be unreceptive, and that's not what you should bother doing. If you can help a brother or a sister in the Christian faith at that time, then that's when you should be making judgments about what you should say. And I suspect you really need to be very careful about what you're saying even and then. Our lesson book, if you recall, had 3 questions we should ask. Do you know that what you're going to say is the whole truth? Can you be impartial? Is judgment your call? That's the good one. Are you really being called on to be the judge here? I used to rant and rave, kinda, about a friend of mine's husband who she did divorce. And finally Ken said, Nancy, you don't know the whole story. You don't know what really is going on. And I know, I knew that. I said, I know. But she's my friend and I don't care. She's the right one, he's the wrong one. So I really wasn't the one to judge. I was not impartial. I had my ideas and that's all I was gonna say about it. So don't do that. You can't do that. And I didn't tell her that. I really didn't. But that's how I felt. Jesus was there teaching his followers to use criticism wisely. And this is all about wise criticism from verse 1 through verse 5. Thinking about it, being sure you know what you're talking about, being on, answering the questions and only speaking to people who are receptive if they make it known to you that they are interested in your judgment. Amazingly enough, this friend never did ask me anything about her marriage and her divorce, and I never did play the part of judge, which was probably very, very good. And she probably had enough sense not to ask me either. He was teaching these followers, and think back, I thought, well, he thought he was going up there and he was going to teach the disciples, trying to get them prepared for what he wanted of these people who were coming to this new faith and following him and how they should act. And then he gets a big crowd. Well, it didn't hurt them either. I mean, they could take or leave what he was saying, but that's what was beginning to happen. Well, by verse 6, he tells the followers to use discernment when evaluating behavior. Not to just jump up there and talk to anybody. He said, this is verse 6, do not give what is holy to dogs, and do not throw your pearls before swine, or they will trample them under their feet, and turn and tear you to pieces. Well, that's kind of a dramatic thing, isn't it? Of course, we're in the year, I don't know what it would have been then on the Greek calendar or the Jewish calendar, but we're back at 1 AD. And in the near Middle East, the dog was not a pet. Cats became pets, but not a dog. And they were not very bright, were they? We know dogs are better. But anyway, I digress. See, I'm making a judgment call. But these dogs, the dogs lived on the street. And they scoured for food. And they were probably what we would call feral dogs today. They just wild, and you didn't want to get close to them.
Nancy, it's hard not to make judgments sometimes.
I'm judging you all the time. I know.
And rightfully so.
But you came, so I didn't want to say anything, I'm trying to use discernment here about what I did. Yes, it is interesting that I don't truly know historically when the dog became a pet. Well, they were working animals, you know, they're domesticated. And from there, you know, they came inside. But, you know, that was their story. They weren't pets. They were considered disgusting and repugnant. And the holy, that the verse talks about, or the sacred information, is the way to the kingdom of God. Well, as much as I love my little dog, I wasn't preaching to him about how to get into heaven. I just thought he was good enough to get there on his own. But, you know, and it would be ludicrous. And that's exactly what Jesus is saying. Don't try to preach to somebody who is like a dog, that won't understand and doesn't want to know. And then he mentions, don't cast your pearls. Well, what are your pearls? What's he talking about?
Your valuables.
Yeah. What I'm teaching you, or what I'm saying. Don't cast your pearls before swine. I don't know if you recall, but I did a lesson once on Cleopatra, and I guess I didn't think about it. They didn't know how to cut diamonds back then, or even what they were. So pearls were your most valuable jewel. And she had a set of pearl earrings. They said could have bought 2 palaces, which just amazed me. So they were extremely valuable, and you wouldn't want to cast them before swine, because we think of swine as living on swill and eating scraps and staying muddy, or they did. Now what do we think about pigs? I know it's the new white meat, but are they really getting in all that mud because they want to wallow in the dirt? Oh yeah. In high school, I dated this guy, and his brother owned a large hog operation. And you did not call them swine. Yeah. But it was interesting. They had little concrete pads to walk on. They had little sprinklers that sprinkled them, because they get hot and they don't sweat. So they've got to be cooled off. And his hog operation was for Hormel, and that's the way they raised them. So my whole attitude toward the hog changed. But I didn't want to get close to him or anywhere. You know, so don't, but what's he talking about? Our pearls are our information, our holiness, the information on the way to the kingdom of God, how to be saved. Who would we not want to talk to about this? Who fits in that category? Well, none of you, I must tell you. If you've got a person who doesn't want to hear your message, should you continue to badger them about this message? No. I think, Bill, don't you tell the story of the guy said, don't talk to me about this again.
Yeah.
And you didn't.
Yeah.
And then he came back to talk to you about it.
Yeah, that's right, that's right.
That may not happen according to this example. But essentially, Jesus was saying, have some discernment about who you choose to try to help. And the overall idea was we were building these churches, and we want these churches to be on the same tack. We want them to be on the same road. We want them to understand what the morality is, and we want them to all be thinking the same way. And we want them to be able to see that and know that that's something different. And there's no reason to try to drag into your congregation or your group people who just adamantly oppose you, who do not want to hear this and do not want to come. That becomes Jesus' or God's problem at that time. You've done what you can do, and they may change. They may come back to you. But you've got to find people who want to hear about the story of salvation. I don't know if I mentioned it to you, but we had for a short time at Mike Kroger, all my stories are about Kroger because I'm always at Kroger. One of the students I subbed with, he worked over there, and he said, I see you there every day. I said, I just love it. I just love it, and I just come every time I can. But anyway, I came in one day and the guy that had taken over the fish and meat was perfect, beautiful. You know, I used to walk in and say, would you be offended if I bring some Windex and just clean this glass for you? It just went right over their head. Everything was spotless. He was so nice. But he said Persian, which means he's Iraqi. You know, and he said to me, where do you go to church? Or are you a Christian? I can't remember which one came first. And I said, well, yes. And I told him where I went to church. I thought, I'd never talked to this man. How did he know that? I guess on Sundays I come in dressed up or something and he kind of put it together. But he wanted to talk to me at length. He really did. And I gave him lots of information about our church and, you know, classes for people who've never been in the Christian faith. But he got transferred. And he was back there, but he told me he'd found a church. And I was so pleased that I had taken the time to write down some stuff and, you know, where we were and convince him. He told me, he said, I do not think my faith is helping me at all. I'm much more impressed with this and I want to learn about it. So you never know, you know, where you'll find people. And I suspect there were other people in that program who were Christians. And maybe something was different. And that's what Jesus was saying. We want you to stand out because of how you approach people and how you treat people and how you act around people. So I guess that was an example. The pearl thing would be, don't preach to somebody who doesn't want to hear it. Usually they won't stay. But I'll tell you very quickly a little story. My mother-in-law, who's been dead many, many years, was in a little town, had a little bitty church. I bet they did have 60 members. And they were all over 60. But someone had left them a huge endowment. So they got this young preacher. And I will say to his benefit, I'm sure he had never been around that many elderly people, like coming in here. And he wanted a lot of changes. And buddy, they weren't changing. And I don't know what all went on. There was a big fight over an elevator when she talked about it. And she said, you know, the last Sunday he was there, he put his shoes up on the pulpit. And he said, I'm dusting my shoes off.
Oh my God.
And I was like, and I am no longer casting my pearls before swine. I said, you're kidding. He actually said it. Well, they thought it was hysterically funny because he was just nuts, I guess. I don't know. And he left. Well, of course he left. He knew that was it. I'd never heard of anything like that, but I thought, at least he knows, you know, some of his Bible. He knows something. But can you imagine? So bad, so bad. You don't want to do that, but you probably won't find him in church like he did. I don't know where he could go that he would be happy. You know, that would be terrible. That would be terrible. And I'm sure he got not much of a recommendation, so, you know, he had to move a long way away. That's all I can think. Well, Jesus ended this lesson with the verse we all have heard over the years. And this is verse 12. In everything, therefore, treat people the same way you want them to treat you. For this is the law and the prophets. We've heard that so many times and we understand that. In our lesson book, it talked about 3 questions we might want to ask before we start in on judgment. And one is, do you know the whole story? And I would say, I probably don't, you know. I have no idea why Janelle wanted that bush on her head, but I just did not know. But anyway, can you be impartial? Well, I was not impartial with my friend and her divorce. So the last says, is judgment your call? Obviously, that was not my call. It's probably not my call today. I think you have to be extremely careful. I watch these judges, even on these TV movies, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, and I think, I would just hate to be up there trying to figure this thing out. or even these hideous stories that show up on TV, I would think, oh, would I hate to be the judge on this thing? I mean, I've already made up my opinion, so I don't want to be the judge, but so hard, don't you think? I think it would be extremely difficult. I also thought about the Rotary code that they speak here. Are y'all familiar with that? Is it fair to all concerned? And usually when we want to criticize or we want to say something, we don't know the whole story. We don't know how fair that is to everybody. I mean, I certainly didn't when I was worried about people stressing in Kroger. Will it build goodwill and better friendships? So, you might want to hold off criticizing a friend. If you realize it's not going to be receptive, there's no point to say anything. Will it be beneficial to all concerned? And I think that's another part. Sometimes just to keep your mouth shut and not say anything that you don't know the whole story. You can't really judge. I like the idea of discernment where I could talk to somebody about our faith and give them information. I don't really have to worry about that. They went on to point out that King David, was a great sinner. And they put the whole story of his seeing Bathsheba, wanting her, sending her husband to the front. He gets killed. David waits what he thinks is a proper amount of time, then he has her come to the palace, and he takes her as his wife. Well, excuse me, we know that this was improper, and I'm trying to read here. Nathan came to David, and he told him a little story about the rich man who wanted to have a feast, but he didn't want to kill any of his lot. So he took the only animal this poor man had. And the animal, a little sheep or something, lived with the family, ate with the family, slept in his bed, kind of like a dog sometimes. And David got furious. He said, oh, this is terrible. He did that. And Nathan said, who is this man? We need to punish him. And Nathan said, well, that's you. Look what you did. You saw her, you had her husband killed, you took her, and you didn't worry about it at all. And God will punish you in like manner. He will take your wives. He will give them to your comrades. He will let them be with them publicly. You will be humiliated. And this is what's going to happen if you don't change your ways or whatever. So you are punished for this kind of activity and judgment. The other was that poor woman that we talked about a lot, the woman caught in adultery. Remember that, Bill? And Steve, they gave me that lesson.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Now you remember.
Yeah.
They did it, I didn't do it.
We must have been absent, because you weren't gonna take it, were you?
It was
I
his
wasn't
lesson.
It was his lesson. He said, I'm gonna be sick, tell her to do it. No, I'm kidding you. The funniest thing that happened, if you didn't hear me tell it, a friend called me and she said, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm writing a Sunday school lesson about adultery. And she said, well, it must be pretty hard to write something and teach about something you don't know anything about. And I thought, well, thank you, I don't. And it really wasn't about adultery, y'all. It was about sin. But hers is a little twist where the men are saying, Jesus says, if you're not guilty, then you're in the position to judge. So cast the first stone, and of course nobody did. I mean, we're all guilty of something that probably somebody could help us work on. But the last verse that I read about all of this said, be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. So things change and people change, and we just need to bide our time and bite our tongue sometimes and think carefully about what we have to say. Any comments? I thought surely some of y'all would confess to your moments of
Judgment.
Judgment, yeah.
Nancy Mary Lou put me in my place one time. Two very young, nice-looking young men came to church, and they had on shorts and flip-flops. And I turned to Mary Lou, I said, I wish you would look at how those guys are dressed, and blah, 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 blah. And Mary Lou said, judge not.
That's stupid.
They could have been out doing carousing and so forth, and they're here, and she was right.
Yeah.
And she put me in my place.
Judge not,
And she
that's
often
good.
does.
Well, aren't you misjudgment? I think all wives are maybe a little judgmental with husbands, so there you go. I think that's good,
But
always
you have
happens.
to right, yeah.
We do, I try very hard, and I've said this before, I taught in a school that was not a gossipy place. You know, if something happened, my department's the last people to know. We're like, what are y'all talking about? We don't know. But we didn't get any of that. It was really very nice to be that situation, you know, in that situation, nobody's talking about people or saying things, and, I mean, I later found out things went on, but I was just oblivious to it, so that may be a good way to go. Anybody else? Well, let me say a short prayer for us and we'll be dismissed. Our most gracious Heavenly Father, you have given us some very good ways to deal with people and deal with our judgments and deal with those who want to know something about the church. If we can live in that form and in that way, that would be very good for us, and we'd ask for your help. We ask you to be with us this coming week. In Christ's name we pray, amen.